Kia ora, koutou katoa. Well, today is Mother's Day, and I've read a story to the children, Bubble Trouble by Margaret Mahy. Margaret Mahy is a wonderful, imaginative poet whose rhyming, alliteration, and creative use of language delights us all. And Bubble Trouble is the only children's poem listed in a book of 100 to be read New Zealand poems. The plot line, in case you don't know it, is simply the baby is in trouble and his mother and sister will need assistance. So the community comes together to save baby. They bring children, Scrabble players, an older crabby couple, two quilters, a jogger, a local minister, and the children's church choir. All try to save baby. In the end, it was one mischievous chorister. You gotta watch these choristers. With a slingshot, quick thinking, and a patchwork quilt. Good old patchworkers that saved the baby. In response to the need of one family, a community was mobilized. I was reminded of Bubble Trouble this week as the community of Tolaga Bay mobilized to find 3-year-old Axel, who'd wandered off with the dog from home on Tuesday afternoon in his gumboots. More than 100 volunteers scoured the area looking for the boy. Helicopters, drones, and dogs joined the search. And happily, thankfully, as we know, 21 hours after, Axel was found unharmed, 3 kilometers from home, wanting his mum. It's a lovely Mother's Day story. Some 20 years or so back, churches, particularly those of a liberal hue, would celebrate Mother's Day by affirming all who nurture others, whether male or female. And posies would be made for the whole congregation. Yet while the roles of men and women in child raising have changed somewhat, and depending on circumstance have some fluidity about them, I personally like to focus this day remembering the women who bore us and raised us, which of course might be more than one woman. Just as I similarly like to remember the fathers in our lives on the 1st of September, first Sunday in September. Remembering fathers and mothers can be difficult. Some of us are blessed with supportive parents who we've looked up to, respected, learned from, loved, and cared for. Most of us haven't known our parent. Some of us haven't known our parent or parents, or our experiences have been very painful, and we struggle to find good to hold on to. Most of us, I suspect, live with a mix of feelings. Yes, there is love, but there's also some pain. Yes, there are things that we've tried to emulate, but there's also things we've tried to forget. Yes, there are good times, but also difficult times. Memories sometimes require lots of healing and forgiving. The Bible isn't particularly helpful when it comes to Mother's Day. There are no disciples, for example, who are mothers with children mentioned in the Christian scriptures. The patriarchal and polygamous cultures of most of the Torah, the first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible, don't give us too much about mothering that is positive to emulate. The one exception might be the saving of baby Moses, which, like Bubble Trouble and Little Axel, was a joint undertaking. Moses, basket bulrushes, you might recall, was saved from the murderous edict of the Pharaoh by his sister Miriam, his birth mother Jochebed, the midwives Shiphrah and Puah, and his adoptive mother, the Pharaoh's daughter. How historical the story is, who knows? But it's an encouragement to us all that if we want to save children, whether these children be Uyghur, Rohingya, refugees, or children held back by poverty and discrimination in our own land, then it's going to take more than just one woman, one mother, or even one family to make a difference. It's going to take a village, and then some. Sometimes on Mother's Day, and it's reflected in our first reading and offertory hymn today, there is attention paid to the biblical imaging of God as mother. This is particularly necessary because Christianity, by and large, has fallen into the mire of succumbing to one dominant metaphor of the divine, namely God as Father. I was interested and pleased at Easter that an article about the Māori Anglican priest, Christopher Douglas Hurawai, talked about his deliberate use of female images and pronouns in his preaching and worship to counter the heresy that God is male. The heresy is not referring to God as Father. It's being locked into one metaphor, one image, one idol, as our Old Testament forebears would say, of God. And by mixing metaphors and genders about God, one can destabilize the dominant fixation. I found a phone number for Chris and rang him up. He was very grateful. He was expecting much criticism from those above him and those who were his colleagues for the article. To question the gender of God is still, believe it or not, a step too far for many Christians, which just shows how deep in the mire we are. Personally, as you no doubt have noticed, I prefer to frame God as something we are in and is in us, rather than some object or being, male or female, outside. The Johannine phrase, God is love, and those who live in love live in God, and God lives in them, points in this direction. As does the phrase ascribed to St. Paul, in God we live and move and have our being. So God is about the realization that we're a part of, immersed in, a oneness, a sacred order of all being. Prayer is an awareness of that connection, and characterized both by deep listening and by acts of compassion. Or put another way, as we love others and ourselves, we can become more aware that we are immersed in God. And out of this awareness comes gratitude. From such a theological understanding arises an ethic or a discipline of, firstly, loving who you are, the good and the not so good bits. And that can take a lifetime. Secondly, of listening to what the mystics call the knowing of the heart. This is about the feeling of connection to the oneness, to God living in and through us and all being and all beings. The knowing of the heart is different from the knowing of the mind. Thirdly, practicing gratitude. Every hour of the day, whether we feel grateful or not, saying thank you. Thank you for life. And lastly, it is, in the words of Joy Cowley, holding your ego tenderly and wisely and helping it go to sleep. Joy sees evil in the world as done by people who are convinced they are right. Evil, she says, comes from our protective instinct for survival, and the ego is its tool. But the ego is not an enemy. That me instinct is an important part of early growth, and if it is developed in a healthy way, it will be subdued in maturity. We all have a tendency to think we are right and others wrong. And some can, when they have the power, use it to enforce their rightness. To live in a peaceful, non-violent world, to live with a spiritual understanding of oneness, to live in a world that is inclusive, diverse, plural. We need to find ways to help others and ourselves. Tenderly and wisely hold our ego, our self-preservation drive, and help it go to sleep. I like this maternal, often paternal, image of cuddling a baby off to sleep. These actions of loving yourself, listening to the knowing of the heart, practicing gratitude, and gently singing our self-interest off to sleep. These are hard to do alone. Like raising or rescuing a child, we need a village, a community. We need to help and encourage one another. We need the skills and the patience of one another. You might have noticed in the Bubble Trouble story that each person brings their own gifts to the task at hand. Some gifts, like Scrabble or reading a book, aren't needed. And others, like patchwork, are. Similarly, you might have heard in the reports of the finding of little Axel that not everyone was out looking. Some were making food, copious quantities of food. Some were telling others what was going on. Some were coordinating. May we, this Mother's Day and every day, value, cherish, and encourage one another in loving, listening, in gratitude, in putting selfishness to sleep, and working with others to build a world where all can belong, all can be rescued, and all can help in the rescuing. Blessings to you this week.